Breaking news out of Nova Scotia that's sending shockwaves through a community that's been holding its breath for 7 months. Just moments ago, sources close to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police confirmed what many feared but few expected: a stunning arrest is about to happen in the Lilly and Jack Sullivan case. And this isn't the arrest everyone's been waiting for. This isn't about Daniel Martell, the man who made that frantic 911 call on May 2, 2025. This isn't about Malaya Brooks Murray, the mother whose story never quite added up. This is about someone whose name has barely been whispered in connection with this case until right now. Someone who's been living quietly, going about his daily routine, thinking he got away with it. Darren Gettys. A 34-year-old construction worker from Pictou County. A man who seemed completely peripheral to everything. Just another face in a small, tight-knit community where everyone knows everyone. But investigators have been watching him, building a case against him brick by brick. And that case is now complete. Cell tower data places him in the exact location where evidence was concealed. Soil forensics tie his truck to those remote Nova Scotia woods. Deleted text messages recovered from his phone reveal guilty knowledge and coordination with Daniel Martell. An eyewitness saw him there, working in the darkness with shovels when most people were still asleep. The arrest warrant has been signed by a judge. The charges have been prepared by prosecutors. And within hours, possibly before the sun sets today, Darren Gettys will be taken into custody. He'll be read his rights. He'll be transported to a detention facility. And he'll face the consequences of the choice he made to help Daniel Martell on the morning of May 2, 2025. If you're just finding this case now, or if you've been following from the beginning and want to stay updated on every development as it happens, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. This story is moving fast. New details are emerging by the hour. An arrest could happen at any moment. And you don't want to miss a single update. So do it now. Subscribe. Turn on those notifications. And drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? I want to know who's part of this community demanding answers and justice for Lilly and Jack Sullivan. Before we dive deeper into this breaking arrest, you need to understand who Lilly and Jack Sullivan were. These weren't just names in headlines. These were real children with real lives, real personalities, real futures that should have stretched for decades ahead of them. Lilly Sullivan was 6 years old. A bright, creative soul who absolutely loved to draw. Her teachers at the local elementary school described her as someone who would spend hours with crayons and markers, creating colorful pictures that she'd proudly show to everyone. She was always eager to help others in her classroom, volunteering to assist teachers with tasks, offering to help classmates who were struggling. She had a kind heart that everyone who knew her recognized. But in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, something changed. Lilly became increasingly withdrawn. The outgoing girl who loved participating in class activities stopped raising her hand. She stopped playing with other children as much during recess. She preferred to sit alone. Her teachers noticed. They worried. Jack Sullivan was 4 years old. An energetic, enthusiastic little boy who loved being outside and playing in all kinds of weather. He was absolutely fascinated by trucks and construction vehicles. He could identify different types with impressive accuracy for a child his age. He'd watch construction sites with rapt attention, pointing out excavators and bulldozers with pure excitement. But Jack was showing signs of anxiety too. Sometimes he'd become extremely fearful without apparent cause, reacting to situations in ways that seemed unusual for a child his age. His teachers noticed the behavioral changes. They documented their concerns. The children lived in Lancetone Station, Pictou County, with their mother Malaya Brooks Murray and her partner Daniel Martell. This was a blended family. Lilly and Jack weren't Daniel's biological children. They were from Malaya's previous relationship. And that family was under crushing pressure. One teacher became so concerned about what she was seeing that she filed a formal report with Child Protective Services 3 weeks before the children disappeared. She documented specific observations. She expressed clear concerns that the children might not be safe. She recommended immediate investigation. But the system, overwhelmed and chronically understaffed, never responded. No social worker visited the home. No one intervened. And 3 weeks later, Lilly and Jack were gone. May 1, 2025, 2:25 in the afternoon. Security cameras at a Dollarama store in Pictou County capture the Sullivan family shopping together. All 5 of them. Malaya pushing a cart with baby Meadow in the stroller attachment. Daniel walking alongside her. And Lilly and Jack moving through the aisles, looking at items on shelves, exhibiting typical childhood curiosity. This footage represents the last time anyone outside the immediate family can verify with absolute certainty that Lilly and Jack were alive and well. This timestamp becomes the starting point for everything that follows. By evening, the family had returned home to their property in Lancedone Station. From approximately 3 or 4 in the afternoon on May 1 until the 911 call the next morning, only Daniel Martell and Malaya Brooks Murray claimed to have seen the children. No other witnesses. No independent verification. Just their word. And their word, as investigators would later discover, was worthless. Here's where the timeline gets critical. At 11:32 that night, May 1, Daniel called Darren Gettys. The call lasted 7 minutes according to detailed phone company records obtained through legal warrants. 7 minutes. What do you talk about for 7 minutes at 11:32 at night when most people are winding down for bed? What conversation requires that much time when there's no legitimate reason to be on the phone? 15 minutes after that call ended, at 11:47, security cameras at a local gas station captured Daniel alone, making a purchase. The timing is suspicious. The location is suspicious. Everything about this late-night trip raises red flags for investigators who've analyzed every second of that evening. Then comes the morning of May 2. At 5:15, just after 5 in the morning when the world is still dark and quiet, Daniel called Gettys again. This call lasted only 2 minutes. Short. Direct. To the point. Investigators believe this was Daniel providing final instructions and exact coordinates for where to meet. 5 minutes later, at 5:20, cell tower data shows Gettys' phone moving from his home address. He got up. He got dressed. He got in his truck. And he drove. The route his phone traveled, based on which towers it sequentially connected to, corresponds exactly to roads leading toward a remote wooded area near the Sullivan property. By 5:35, Gettys' phone reached that area. And it stayed there until 6:05. 30 minutes in a remote location at dawn with Daniel Martell. At 5:45, during that same window, a delivery driver spotted Daniel's truck parked on an isolated service road that leads into those woods. 5 minutes later, at 5:50, an early morning jogger saw 2 men in those woods, both holding shovels, working intensely off the main trail in an area where people don't typically go. Then at 10:01 that morning, the 911 call came in. Daniel and Malaya reported that Lilly and Jack had wandered through their backyard gate into the woods and vanished. But the timeline doesn't support that story. The phone records don't support it. The cell tower data doesn't support it. Nothing supports it except the words of 2 people who had every reason to lie. 3 weeks ago, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police executed a search warrant on Darren Gettys' home and vehicles. This search was conducted quietly, without media attention, without public announcement, without any headlines alerting the community to what was happening. No news cameras. No press releases. Just methodical, thorough police work. And what they found provides concrete physical evidence that ties Gettys directly to what happened in those woods on the morning of May 2. The first piece of evidence is a shovel found in the back of Gettys' truck. This wasn't just any shovel sitting clean in a toolbox. This shovel had soil caked on it. Dried soil that was still adhering to the metal surface. Not just a light dusting from casual use. We're talking about soil that was packed on there from digging, from working the ground, from being used for something that required force and effort. Investigators carefully collected that soil using proper forensic procedures, preserved it in evidence bags, and sent it to a laboratory for comprehensive analysis. The results came back definitive. The soil composition matches samples from the remote wooded area where Daniel's truck was spotted that morning. The same area where the eyewitness saw two men with shovels. The same area where cell tower data placed both Daniel and Gettys during that critical 30-minute window. This isn't an approximate match. This isn't kind of close. Forensic soil experts who analyze the samples say the match is conclusive based on mineral content, particle size distribution, clay composition, and organic material. Gettys' shovel had been used to dig in that specific location. There's no innocent explanation for that. The second piece of evidence is even more damning. Investigators found work gloves in Gettys' truck. These gloves were sent for DNA testing using sensitive forensic methods. And they tested positive for traces of human DNA. The testing is still being completed and confirmed through additional analysis because these things take time and labs have to be thorough. But preliminary results suggest the DNA may belong to one or both of the Sullivan children. If that's confirmed through final testing, and sources close to the investigation believe it would be absolutely devastating evidence. It would mean Gettys had direct physical contact with Lilly and Jack, that he touched them, moved them, handled them in the process of concealing evidence in those woods. The third piece of evidence comes from Gettys' own words. Investigators found text messages on his phone that he had attempted to delete. He thought if he deleted them, they'd be gone forever, that no one would ever see what he'd written, that his fear and guilt would stay hidden. He was wrong. Forensic specialists recovered those deleted messages using specialized software that can retrieve data from phone memory even after it's been erased. In one message to a friend sent in the days after May 2nd, Gettys wrote that he had done something he shouldn't have done and he was scared it was going to come back on him. When the friend pressed for details, Gettys wouldn't elaborate. He just said he couldn't talk about it and told his friend to forget he said anything. That's consciousness of guilt right there. That's someone who knows they've crossed a line. But it gets worse. In another recovered message sent directly to Daniel Martell on May 5th, just 3 days after the children were reported missing, Gettys wrote this. You said this would be simple and no one would know, but they're searching everywhere and I'm freaking out. Daniel's response was equally damning, stay calm. Stick to the plan. Don't talk to anyone about anything. This will blow over. These messages demonstrate clearly that Gettys knew he had done something wrong. They show direct coordination between him and Daniel. And they show he was terrified of getting caught. There's a witness. Someone who saw both men in those woods on the morning of May 2nd. Someone whose testimony ties all the physical evidence and cell phone data together into one undeniable conclusion. This witness's identity is being carefully protected for safety reasons and to encourage others who might have information to come forward without fear. But what this person saw that morning is critical to understanding exactly what happened. This witness is an early morning jogger who runs the trails in that wooded area several times a week as part of a regular fitness routine. Someone who knows the area well, who's familiar with the trails, the terrain, the usual activity or lack thereof in those woods at dawn. On May 2nd at approximately 5:50 in the morning, this jogger was running through the area when something caught their attention. Two men off the main trail in an area where people don't typically go. And both men were holding shovels. The jogger couldn't see exactly what they were doing because of the distance and intervening trees. But could clearly see two men, two vehicles parked nearby on a service road that's not commonly used, and both men appearing to be working the ground intensively. At the time, the jogger didn't think much of it. Didn't find it particularly suspicious. Assumed they were doing some kind of legitimate work. Maybe trail maintenance. Maybe land management. Maybe something related to forestry or conservation. People do work in the woods sometimes. It's not inherently suspicious to see two guys with shovels in a wooded area during early morning hours. So the jogger continued the run. Didn't stop to ask questions. Didn't think anything more of it. But then later that morning, the news broke. Lilly and Jack Sullivan were missing. Massive searches began in that specific area. Law enforcement flooded the woods. Volunteers combed through the terrain. Helicopters flew overhead. And the jogger started to wonder. Started to think back to those two men with shovels. Started to question whether what had been witnessed was somehow connected to the missing children. But the jogger didn't come forward immediately. Partly out of uncertainty about whether it was actually relevant. Partly out of not wanting to get involved in a major criminal investigation with all the complications that involvement brings. Partly out of fear of being wrong and wasting investigators' time. It's easy to judge that decision in hindsight. Easy to say you should have called right away. But in the moment, when you're not sure if what you saw means anything, it's harder than you think to pick up the phone. As the case progressed over months, as the jogger saw extensive media coverage about Daniel's truck being in that area at that exact time, about cell phone data placing Daniel there, about intensive searches in those woods, the weight of what had been witnessed became too heavy to carry. The jogger finally decided to contact investigators and report what had been seen that morning. The jogger was brought in for detailed interviews. Asked to describe everything about that morning. The time. The location. The vehicles. The men. What they were wearing. What they were doing. Every detail, no matter how small. Then investigators showed the jogger photos of various people and asked if any looked like the men seen in the woods. The jogger identified one of the men as possibly being Daniel Martell based on build and appearance. The second man, the jogger said with reasonable confidence, looked like the person in a photo of Darren Gettys. This eyewitness testimony doesn't stand alone. It's corroborated by everything else. The cell phone data. The soil forensics. The deleted text messages. This is an airtight case. So who exactly is Darren Gettys? Why would a 34-year-old construction worker with no apparent connection to the Sullivan children get involved in something this horrific? The answer lies in his relationship with Daniel Martell and the kind of loyalty that can make people do unthinkable things. Gettys lives approximately 15 kilometers from the Sullivan property in Pictou County. Until this week, his name had barely been mentioned in media coverage of this case. He wasn't someone investigators publicly identified as a person of interest in their press conferences. He wasn't someone whose photo appeared in news reports. He seemed completely peripheral to everything, just another resident of this small, tight-knit community where everyone knows everyone and news travels fast. But Darren Gettys and Daniel Martell have known each other for approximately 6 years. They met through work in the construction industry, both doing construction and manual labor jobs in the Pictou County area where employment opportunities in that field are common but often sporadic and unpredictable. They weren't best friends. They didn't spend all their time together. But they were friendly enough to socialize occasionally outside of work. They'd grab beers together after a long day on a job site. They'd help each other out with odd jobs when one needed an extra set of hands or when work was slow and money was tight. And here's what matters most. Daniel considered Gettys someone he could trust with sensitive matters. Someone who wouldn't ask too many questions about things that seemed unusual or questionable. Someone who valued loyalty and discretion above everything else. Someone who would help when called upon without judgment or hesitation. That trust, that sense that Gettys could be relied upon to keep his mouth shut and help when needed, may have led Daniel to involve him in something unthinkable. On the night of May 1, 2025, something happened in the Sullivan household. Something that Daniel and Malaya couldn't handle alone. Something that required help from someone outside the family. Someone they could trust to stay quiet. Someone who wouldn't panic. Someone who would do what needed to be done and never speak a word of it to anyone. Daniel called Darren Gettys at 11:32 that night. And Gettys answered. For 7 months, investigators have been piecing together exactly what role Gettys played in what happened after that phone call. They've been methodical and patient, building an airtight case brick by brick. They didn't rush to make an arrest. They didn't tip their hand publicly by revealing his name or connection to the case. They worked quietly in the background, gathering evidence, connecting dots, analyzing phone records and cell tower data, conducting surveillance operations, preparing for the moment when they could move forward with charges that would stick in court and lead to a conviction. That moment is now. The evidence they've compiled is overwhelming and undeniable. And Darren Gettys is about to face the consequences of answering that phone call on May 1st. To understand why Daniel Martell would call Darren Gettys for help that night, you need to understand the pressure cooker environment inside the Sullivan household in the months leading up to May 2nd. This wasn't a happy home. This wasn't a stable family working through normal challenges. This was a household on the brink of collapse from multiple directions simultaneously. The financial strain was crushing and relentless. Daniel worked sporadically in construction and manual labor, but employment was unpredictable. Periods of intense work followed by periods of unemployment with no income coming in. Malaya worked part-time in retail at a local store, earning minimal wages that barely covered basic necessities. Together they were struggling desperately to support 5 people, including 3 children with all the expenses children bring. Clothing, food, medical care, utilities, rent. They were behind on rent payments, falling further behind each month with no realistic way to catch up. They were accumulating debt from credit cards and other obligations. They couldn't afford basic necessities at times. This created constant, unrelenting tension and frequent intense arguments that neighbors could hear through walls and windows. But the problems went far deeper than money. Daniel Martell had a troubling history that should have raised red flags long before Lilly and Jack disappeared. Before his relationship with Malaya, he'd been involved with another woman who had a young daughter from a previous relationship. During that relationship, which lasted about 2 years, concerns were raised by multiple people about Daniel's interactions with the child. He was described as being too rough, too harsh in his discipline methods, lacking the patience and gentleness that young children require. There was a specific documented incident where concerns were raised and investigated by social workers, but ultimately no criminal charges were filed. The relationship ended shortly after, and Daniel moved on without facing legal consequences. But the pattern was established in official records. Malaya Brooks Murray had her own concerning history as a parent. Approximately 2 years before Lilly and Jack disappeared, she had temporarily lost custody of both children. They were removed from her care by child welfare authorities and placed with Malaya's mother for several months while Malaya was required to address personal issues that made authorities question her ability to care for them properly. She eventually regained custody, presumably after completing court-mandated requirements. But family members privately expressed doubts about whether she was truly ready to handle the responsibilities of parenting 2 young children. Text messages recovered from both Daniel and Malaya's phones reveal a relationship under significant strain. They argued frequently about money, about the children, about their future together, about feeling trapped. Daniel expressed significant resentment in messages to his friends about having to support children who weren't biologically his. He referred to Lilly and Jack explicitly as burdens he never asked for. He talked about how much easier life would be without them complicating everything. Malaya expressed feeling completely overwhelmed by caring for 3 children. She talked about feeling trapped by motherhood, about regretting her choices, about wishing she could start over. There were discussions between Daniel and Malaya about their problems, about feeling like there was no way out, about wishing things were different, about wanting a clean slate. Reading these messages now, knowing what happened, they take on an extremely sinister tone that will likely be presented as evidence of motive when this case goes to trial. Darren Gettys is facing serious criminal charges that could put him behind bars for a significant portion of his life. Based on the evidence that's been reported and the typical charges in cases like this, prosecutors are preparing multiple counts that reflect the gravity of what he did on the morning of May 2. The first charge is accessory after the fact. In Canadian law, this charge applies to someone who helps another person avoid arrest or prosecution for a serious offense, knowing that the person committed that offense. The evidence clearly shows that Gettys helped Daniel Martell conceal evidence, knowing what had happened to Lilly and Jack Sullivan. The phone calls, the coordination, the deleted text messages where he acknowledged that Daniel had told him this would be simple and no one would know, all of this supports the charge of accessory after the fact. This charge alone can carry a sentence of up to 14 years in prison. The second charge is obstruction of justice. This applies to someone who interferes with an investigation or legal proceeding. By helping Daniel conceal evidence in those woods, by deleting text messages that showed his involvement and guilty knowledge, Gettys obstructed the investigation into what happened to those children. He made it harder for investigators to find the truth. He delayed justice. This charge can carry a sentence of up to 10 years in prison. The third charge is tampering with evidence. This applies to someone who destroys, conceals, or alters physical evidence with the intent to impair its availability or usefulness in an investigation or proceeding. Gettys' actions in the woods on May 2, working with shovels to conceal evidence while investigators and volunteers were preparing to search those same woods for missing children, clearly supports this charge. The penalties for tampering with evidence are similar to obstruction of justice, potentially up to 10 years. Even if these sentences run concurrently rather than consecutively, Gettys is looking at potentially spending a decade or more behind bars if convicted at trial. And here's the thing. Gettys wasn't there when the tragedy occurred. He wasn't in that house on the evening of May 1. He didn't harm Lilly and Jack. He's not responsible for what happened to them. But what he did afterward makes him criminally liable and makes him complicit in one of the most disturbing cases Nova Scotia has seen in years. And that's where the possibility of a plea deal becomes relevant. Prosecutors know that Gettys has information they desperately need. He knows where Lilly and Jack are. He was there when evidence was concealed in those woods. He helped Daniel do it. He knows the exact location. For 7 months, search teams have combed through those woods. Volunteers have walked grid patterns covering square kilometers of terrain. Cadaver dogs have worked the area. Ground-penetrating radar has been used in some sections. But the woods are vast and the terrain is rough. Finding evidence that was deliberately hidden by two men who knew exactly what they were doing is incredibly difficult without specific information about where to look. Darren Gettys has that specific information. He can end the uncertainty that's haunted this community for 7 months. He can provide answers to questions that have kept families awake at night. He can give closure to people who desperately need it. And prosecutors know this. Which means there's a very real possibility that they will offer Gettys a deal in exchange for his full cooperation. Here's how these deals typically work. Prosecutors approach the defendant through his defense attorney. They lay out all the evidence they have against him. They explain the charges he's facing and the potential sentences if he's convicted at trial. Then they make an offer. Cooperate fully. Tell us everything you know. Show us exactly where the evidence is located. Testify truthfully against Daniel Martell and Malaya Brooks Murray at their trial. And in exchange, we'll reduce the charges you're facing. We'll recommend a lighter sentence to the judge. We'll make sure the court knows you cooperated and helped bring justice. For someone like Gettys who's looking at potentially a decade or more in prison, that kind of deal can be incredibly tempting. A good defense attorney will argue that Gettys deserves leniency because he wasn't the one who harmed those children, that he made a terrible decision to help a friend but that he's not a danger to society in the same way Daniel and Malaya are. And prosecutors might agree if it means getting the testimony and evidence location they need to secure convictions against the people who are actually responsible for what happened. For 7 months, Pictou County has lived under a dark cloud. A cloud of grief, anger, confusion, and an overwhelming need for answers that have remained just out of reach. This small, tight-knit community in Nova Scotia became ground zero for one of Canada's most disturbing missing children cases. And the nation watched as the search for Lilly and Jack Sullivan consumed everything. Volunteers turned out by the hundreds in those first weeks. People who had never met the Sullivan family put their lives on hold to walk through dense woods, calling out the names of two children they'd only seen in photographs. They combed through rough terrain in all kinds of weather. They searched abandoned buildings, checked culverts and drainage areas, looked in places most people would never think to look. They gave their time, their energy, their hope that somehow those children would be found alive and safe. Media coverage was relentless and extensive. Every local news station carried updates. National networks picked up the story. Social media exploded with theories, speculation, armchair detective work, and passionate pleas for information. The case became a topic of conversation in homes across Canada and beyond. People who had no connection to Nova Scotia found themselves invested in finding out what happened to Lilly and Jack. But as weeks turned into months, as winter gave way to spring and then summer, the harsh reality began to set in. Those children weren't coming home. The story Daniel and Malaya told about them wandering through a backyard gate into the woods didn't hold up under scrutiny. The evidence pointed increasingly towards something far more sinister. And the community's grief began to harden into anger and a demand for accountability. People wanted answers. They wanted to know what happened in that house on May 1st. They wanted to know why the child welfare system failed to act on reports filed by concerned teachers. They wanted to know how two adults could harm children and then orchestrate an elaborate cover-up. They wanted justice for two innocent kids who deserved so much better than what they got. But until now, there have been no arrests beyond Daniel and Malaya. No additional suspects identified publicly. No concrete answers about what happened after the tragedy occurred. No information about where Lilly and Jack were taken or how the cover-up was accomplished. The investigation seemed to stall, leaving the community frustrated and exhausted. Now, with Darren Gettys about to be arrested, there's a sense that finally, after 7 long months, something is happening. The investigation is moving forward. Investigators haven't given up. They're still actively working to build the strongest possible case. They're pursuing every person who played a role in what happened. And they're sending a clear message to anyone else who might have information about this case. We know more than you think. We're building cases against everyone involved. If you had a role in this, no matter how small you think it was, no matter how much time has passed, we're coming for you next. The net is tightening. The walls are closing in. And there's nowhere left to hide. The community is exhausted but determined. They've waited 7 months for movement. They've held vigils. They've kept Lilly and Jack's names in the public consciousness. They've refused to let this case fade into the background. And now they're seeing the results of that persistence. Justice may be slow, but it's coming. The immediate future is unfolding right now. Darren Gettys' arrest is imminent, possibly within hours. Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers will arrive with the signed warrant. He'll be taken into custody, read his rights, and transported to a detention facility where he'll be processed and held pending his first court appearance. Within 24 to 48 hours, Gettys will have an arraignment hearing. The charges will be formally read in open court. He'll enter a plea, almost certainly not guilty at this stage. Then the judge will decide about bail. Given the seriousness of charges and evidence, prosecutors will argue he's a flight risk who already demonstrated willingness to conceal evidence and obstruct justice. Strong possibility he'll be denied bail and held in custody pending trial. After arraignment, real negotiations begin. Gettys' defense attorney will meet with prosecutors in private discussions. They'll discuss the evidence. They'll discuss what Gettys knows. They'll discuss the possibility of a deal. Here's the offer prosecutors typically make. Cooperate fully. Tell everything. Provide complete statement detailing your involvement in Daniel Martell's actions. Show exact location where evidence was concealed. Testify truthfully against Daniel and Malaya at trial. In exchange, reduced charges, lighter sentence, judicial acknowledgement of cooperation. For someone facing potentially 15 years in prison, that deal becomes incredibly tempting. His attorney will explain clearly. Take the deal, serve maybe 6 or 7 years, get out in your early 40s. Or go to trial, risk conviction on all charges, spend next decade and a half behind bars. If Gettys cooperates, his testimony could devastate Daniel and Malaya at trial. He can testify about phone calls, about what Daniel told him, about driving to those woods, about what they did with shovels for 30 minutes. Details only someone actually there would know. This arrest represents major progress. Justice, though delayed, is approaching. The question haunting everyone since May 2 might finally be answered. Where are Lilly and Jack Sullivan? If this case matters to you, subscribe and turn on notifications. This story is far from over. Drop a comment with your thoughts. Will Gettys take a deal? What happens next? Darren Gettys holds answers a community desperately needs. Within days, he'll make a choice. Stay silent or help bring justice to 2 children who deserve better.